Hi everyone, Kurant here, and welcome to part 5 of my cancer story. Last time we talked about chemotherapy and everything that went into that, the lead up to it, the whole process, and some of the basic side effects and issues that I essentially had with particularly the initial treatment. Today, we're going to be looking at what I am calling in the title 12 Weeks of Bleh, because essentially in terms of unique content, so to speak, for this vlog, I'm kind of running out. I have talked a lot about the process kind of leading up to chemotherapy and then the actual chemotherapy and what have you. Now what we're going to be looking at is kind of lather, rinse, repeat. Is I got chemo, I recovered, I got more chemo, I recovered, I got more chemo, I recovered, etc. So, admittedly, this is the part of my cancer story that's probably going to be the most nebulous, that I honestly don't have a great plan for coming in, so I'm very much, and I've been going in large part off the cuff with really all of these, but I'm very much going off the cuff for this one. So if this one is a little bit less planned than the others, or if it feels a little bit less put together than the others, then forgive me, because that's kind of how it is. So, okay. Just kind of the basics of it first off. So I ended up getting 6 treatments of chemotherapy. So the way that they wanted me to do it, which is generally the safe way to do it, is I got chemotherapy, then I spent the weekend-ish recovering. Usually the weekend took care of much of it. I was mentioning in the last episode that after pretty much Sunday is when the steroids wore off. And my body went into, okay, screw you, let's sleep all the time mode, which was mostly really Sunday, Monday, and some Tuesdays. And then I would start getting back to myself, I suppose, and then I could start doing more. So essentially, for the most part, continue that pattern 6 times, and that's the very bare details of those 12 weeks. But to kind of go into a little bit more depth, so I would take chemotherapy, and as I mentioned last time, that took probably about 5 hours or so. So around probably 8 until about 1 p.m.-ish, 1:30 that day. Go home, we'll get something to eat, go home, and then it was basically just kind of sit around. Really, that was a lot of my 12 weeks, was sitting on my butt. Because the thing with chemotherapy is, and I think I mentioned this before, is chemotherapy attacks the cancer cells that are rapidly trying to essentially reproduce wherever they are. Whether it's, for me, it was lymph nodes in my neck, or it could be breast, or stomach, or liver, or pancreas, or you name it pretty much. So chemotherapy goes after those cells. The problem is it also goes after a lot of other cells that also rapidly reproduce, like red and white blood cells. So you have to be careful with a lot of things in terms of what you do in terms of recovery from chemotherapy or trying to live with chemotherapy or whatnot. And everybody responds a little bit differently. Some people will be more fatigued than others, some people will be more sore than others, etc. In general, as I mentioned, probably my biggest issues were nausea, that I felt like I had a lead block in my stomach pretty much at all times, especially that first week or so after the chemotherapy. And the second big side effect was fatigue, especially those first couple of sessions, because it was those couple of sessions that I had the dexamethasone. I think, well, I and my mom, who's the medical professional in the family, we were both pretty much of the impression afterward that that was one of the things that helped cause the fatigue, because I couldn't sleep very well, because I was hiccuping all the dang time. So, problems. So those were the big things, but then there was the little stuff that kind of came along with it. Because chemotherapy goes after your red and white blood cells, your cardiovascular ability drops pretty significantly, and that was apparent in a lot of little ways. Probably the biggest little way in which that was apparent was I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment complex, so I gotta climb up 2 flights of stairs to get up and down from my apartment every time I do it. That got exhausting. I mean, it's not exactly not exhausting anyway, but it got really exhausting when I was on chemo because, well, those were steep stairs, and my apartment is, spoiler alert, not ADA compliant in the slightest. So, if I was to get up and down to my apartment, I was going to have to climb those stairs, and those stairs got pretty tough. So there's that. Really the way things went in terms of just general, kind of what those 2 weeks were like. I would get my chemo, go home. Steroids would last until probably early Sunday, and I'd feel pretty good, decent to good, the rest of Friday and Saturday. Sunday, the steroids wore off. There went the drop. Just... And that was usually when Mom went home, was Sunday, because from that point on, we know then that everything's fine. I'm just going to sleep the next 2 days, so don't worry about it. So that's when she typically went home. My best friend, who was also here a couple of times for my recovery, would stay till Monday because he worked 4 10-hour days at his job, and he could do a lot of his work from not the office anyway, so he had a little bit more leeway. Anyway, so that's usually when Mom would go home, and I would sleep. Sunday, most of Sunday, I would kind of be on and off. I would sleep most of the day in fits, and then the rest of the day, whenever I was awake, I would watch stuff. Whether it was YouTube, Twitch, ESPN, Netflix, whatever. Then Monday, for the first couple of treatments, Monday was pretty much the same because I was still fatigued. And then Tuesday, I would start kind of feeling myself getting back to normal. Then, really from there, probably, it depended, honestly, as far as how long would it take for the nausea to go away. It depended. How long would it take for the fatigue to go away? That got better as time went on. I think as my body got more used to the chemotherapy, the fatigue was less a problem. Then also, us getting off the dexamethasone made it much less of a problem. But the nausea usually stuck around for pretty much the first week. The feeling in the pit of my stomach that all the medicine I took essentially kept me from ralphing everything that I ate. So that went until really the first week, and after the first week was over with, pretty much, I was mostly fine, not really to resume pre-chemo activity per se, but I was fine to take a walk around the block where my apartment complex was, or maybe go to do grocery shopping very carefully, and etc. I didn't go back to work. I mean, my workplace was very understanding about it, aka my retail job, because I could teach from home. I could teach virtually, and I did, so I was able to keep doing that. I didn't do any tutoring because even though tutoring was virtual, I didn't think it was fair to ask them to not show up every other week because I'm in the middle of recovering from chemo. So, yeah. And my retail job was understanding about me not coming back for a while. I was on a leave of absence until December because, well, it's retail. There's lots of people coughing and hacking and carrying things around, and I was immune compromised because, like I said, my white blood cells were one of the things that chemotherapy just... So I had to be very careful about going places with large amounts of people, and my retail job was prime among them, so I didn't go back. So, I mean, could I have conceivably worked on the weekends when I wasn't taking chemotherapy? Yeah, I could have, but I don't think it would have been best for me, and my oncologist very strongly recommended against it. And Dr. Hull was intent that I not go back to my retail job until everything was done, and I fully agreed with it, because retail is one of those jobs that's basically a walking petri dish, and I didn't want to get sick, especially because, well, yeah, that's another thing that we should talk about while I'm on this episode, actually. So what was life like having chemotherapy during a COVID pandemic? Interestingly enough, it kind of made things easier. Go figure. Because whenever we were getting ready for everything, the whole chemo 101 bit, they advised me to do a number of things, including social distance, don't go out into big public gatherings, wear a mask, which should sound familiar, because yeah, that's the sort of stuff we had to do for COVID. And yeah, so when I was talking with them getting ready, they said, you know, one of the sort of side effects of this is that chemotherapy, or is that the COVID pandemic and all the public health regulations we had to take for it helped sort of make things a little bit easier, because when you're immune compromised with chemotherapy or radiation or some variation thereof, it's not a good idea for you to be around a lot of people very often because, well, you're immune compromised. Your immune system has basically been just gut punched, and it's a lot easier for you to catch the littlest of things. Fever, flu, whatever. Stuff that you'd normally go, I'm fine. Nope, not during chemo. So, in some sense, it made it a lot easier. In other ways, it kind of sucked because it meant that Mom couldn't be there with me when I was getting chemotherapy, and my best friend couldn't be with me when I was getting chemotherapy. They had to go back home and, you know, do other stuff. Mom worked, and Leaf just watched things, I guess. But anyway, so in that sense, it sucked. But in some other senses, it made it a lot easier because, especially going to like the grocery store and things like that, because one of the things that is an issue with chemotherapy is kind of going out and doing your usual stuff. Grocery shopping, exercising, you know, fill in the blank. Because you're immune compromised and you've got to be careful with that. But the good thing was, considering that we were under a stringent COVID pandemic at the time, we had to wear masks, we had to social distance, all that stuff. It made it a lot better for me because my chances of catching something was much less than it would have been if I was in chemotherapy during sort of normal time when nobody's social distancing, nobody's wearing masks, nobody's washing their hands, etc. So in that sense, it was better, easier. Excuse me. So, I mean, it was weird, in a sense, being in chemotherapy in a pandemic. But in some sense, another way that kind of made things easier was, of course, when the pandemic started and everything shut down and everybody was like, oh crap, what do? We all started watching Netflix. And eventually Disney Plus, and, you know, all the streaming services, YouTube, Twitch, everything. We all started watching a whole bunch of stuff online because there was pretty much nothing else to do. So the good thing was I was already doing that because of the pandemic, and now I was doing it more because of chemo. Because I couldn't go anywhere. Pretty much literally couldn't go anywhere for a few days, and wasn't a great idea to go anywhere for the rest of the days. So I did a lot of watching, and mostly 2020 for me was the year of Star Trek. I watched Deep Space Nine during the beginning, starting I think late March, and essentially during the beginning of the pandemic. I think during chemotherapy I was watching Voyager. Then toward the end of the pandemic I started watching the original series, Enterprise. And then I think toward the end of the pandemic / toward the beginning of this year, I was watching the original series. So, lots of Star Trek. I also watched, Black Mirror, which is good, although it's kind of dark Twilight Zone-y in a lot of ways, with almost every episode save one in particular that was my favorite episode. I forget the name of it right offhand, but anyway. I also watched Queen's Gambit and various movies. I think I watched, I watched all the Indiana Jones movies. I watched, I don't remember, a lot. I watched a lot of stuff. And watching all that stuff was one of the things that helped keep me occupied while I pretty much had nothing better to do than sit on my butt. So that helped too. But I will say, one thing that was nice from this whole thing, and there's a lot of things really, but especially during the 12-13 weeks of me being through chemo sessions and such, one specific event that I was happy about, that was a nice highlight of everything, was my sister getting married. The younger of my two sisters. I have two sisters. They're both younger than I am. The elder of the two has been married and has 3 kids. So she's been in that state for a while. But the younger of my two sisters got married last Halloween. And it was great. I was glad to be there. I went. Everybody was... Mom was concerned that things were going to be problematic because, to be honest, not a lot of people wore masks. And, yeah. But fortunately, things turned out all right. I got tested afterward for COVID and I didn't have it, so yay. But I was happy because I got to go to a public event, yay, and got to see my sister get married. I'm not going to show her and her husband because I haven't, I asked my oncologist and assistant for permission before I even mentioned their names, and I haven't talked to my sister yet, so I'm not going to show her. But I am going to show a picture of me in a suit at the wedding. So I think I looked pretty dapper, although unfortunately one of the ways in which chemotherapy had changed me was that I got fatter. And that also was the pandemic too, because there were folks who did a lot of workouts at their apartments and houses. I didn't. Shame on me, I guess. But unfortunately, well, let me back up. I was part of the wedding party. I was one of the groomsmen, so yay! And unfortunately, I ordered I think it was a XX sized vest. It was a maroon red vest. I don't think you could see it in the picture. Unfortunately, that thing didn't really fit, which sucked. But fortunately, the suit that I had did fit, and so I was able to kind of cover that part up. But oh well. Anyway, so the wedding was fun. I was glad to be able to get a chance to see people. I got to see some family I hadn't seen in ages. And everybody, obviously wanted to see how I was doing and all that stuff. So that was nice. But yeah, pretty much the 12 weeks of my chemo and recovery really was a lot of the same stuff. There were other things that I was doing online related to those 12 weeks. But I want to actually talk about that in the next episode. Because the next episode is going to be about my support networks. And I can't wait to talk about that. Because I've mentioned many, many times in these now 5 videos so far how fortunate I was in a lot of things with my cancer and everything with it. That was another one of the things I was really fortunate with, was my support networks and how people helped me out and were good to me. And holy cow, so I got plenty to talk about there. That one's probably going to go along for a while, and I've got a little bit of permission asking I need to do for that one too. So not so much anything that I'm going to show on camera, but something that I'm going to link to. So anyway, but that's going to be the next episode. I'm really looking forward to that one because, well, just spoiler alert, y'all are freaking amazing. And you know who you are. I'll probably name some of you next episode, so fair warning. But yeah, so that's going to be next time. But I think I'm pretty much done with this one. Like I said, this was kind of the least organized of the episodes that I had because lather, rinse, repeat. Rinse, lather, repeat, however you want to say that phrase. But it's a lot of the same stuff for 12 weeks, pretty much. It's chemo, sleep, bleh, slowly kind of getting back to some semblance of normalcy, walking around the neighborhood, talking to people, going grocery shopping, then cue the next chemo session, and etc. So, yeah, that's pretty much that, I think. So let me find my button here. Yeah, I've got a hotkey button to shut off recordings for OBS, so that's what I keep reaching for and looking for at the end of these videos. Anyway, so thank you guys for watching, as always. I know this one's a little bit shorter than the last couple have been, so yeah. Next one, though, I don't know how long it's going to be honest, because there's a few things I want to talk about in terms of support networks and how people supported me. I don't want to go into a lot of detail necessarily about some of it, because some of it has to do with money, and I don't really want to be particularly detailed about money because some people get nervous about that. So anyway, but yeah, thank you guys for watching, as always. I appreciate it. I've been pretty happy with how people have responded to this so far as watching and asking questions and such, so yay! Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of whatever day you end up watching this, and hopefully I will see you soon for the next video.